Today we're going to talk about the Holy Grail. So when we read Mallory, we skipped the chapter that talks about the Holy Grail, and I did that deliberately for a couple of reasons. One is that the Grail narrative is really long and complicated, and we only get a little snippet of it. So you would not have really had enough context, I think, to appreciate the Grail story. And second is just the complexity of it itself. Even if we had had time to read the whole thing, the Grail story is extremely difficult to get through. But the Holy Grail is a really important symbol in Arthurian literature. So I want to spend some time talking about it today. With your research, especially Essay 3, a lot of you will probably come across the Holy Grail and Grail narratives. Okay, so the Holy Grail, Grail meant a vessel. So the Holy Grail is simply a cup. The origins of the Grail are probably rooted in ancient fertility rites, pre-Christian rites. So the Grail is probably of Celtic origins. Mythologically, it goes back to what was called the Cauldron of Plenty. But by the time Arthurian legends were written down, of course, Christianity had set in, and Christians gave the Grail Christian meaning and then applied it to Arthur's story. It's described as a wonder-working vessel in the care of a mysterious king or keeper, and it has life-giving, sustaining qualities about it. The mysterious king or keeper is often called the Fisher King. It becomes the primary quest of Arthur's knights, representing perfect Christianity. In the early works, like for Chrétien, Percival is the Grail knight, but in later works, Galahad is the knight who achieves the Grail. So for Mallory, Lancelot is the perfect earthly knight, but his son Galahad is the perfect Christian knight. And we read the story about how Galahad was conceived by Elaine. So Galahad is the Grail knight who achieves the Grail. But the Grail goes way back. So I'm going to give you a brief history of how it appears in medieval and then in a little bit of modern literature as well. So the Grail is first mentioned by Chrétien in Percival. We did not read Percival because Chrétien left it incomplete. But in it, the Grail is described in a passage that reads like this. A maiden, beautiful, noble, and well attained, was carrying a Grail. When she entered the hall with the Grail, there was such a green light that the candles lost their brightness, just as the stars do. Note that for Chrétien, writing in the 12th century, the Grail is not explicitly Christian. Remember, Chrétien, again, he never finished the work, so maybe it would have been Christian had we gotten to the end of it. But Percival is in pursuit of the Grail, and it's not mentioned as explicitly Christian. The next significant retelling of the Grail is by the writer Robert de Boron, who gives it an explicit Christian meaning. So who's credited with taking the Celtic cauldron of plenty and turning it into a religious vessel. It comes to be associated actually with the communion cup or with the cup used to collect sweat and blood from Christ's body on the cross. So Robert started that tradition. And here's how Robert's portrayal of the Grail reads. And what will be the fame of the vessel that pleases you so? Tell us, what is it called? When it is named by its proper name? Petrus answered, I have no wish to conceal it. He who wishes to name it properly will call it Grail. For the early 13th century author of a work, anonymous work called Peredur, the Grail takes a really unusual form, and here's a passage where the Grail appears. Peredur sat beside his uncle, and they talked. He saw two young men enter the hall and go into another room. They carried an enormous spear with 3 streams of blood flowing from the point to the floor. After a brief silence, 2 young women entered carrying a large platter containing a man's head covered in blood. And so it was this head that actually is the Grail in Peredur. So Wolfram von Eschenbach, who wrote a continuation of Chrétien's Percival, since Chrétien didn't finish his, a number of writers did this, but he also portrays the Grail in an unusual, though less gruesome manner. Percival asked the hermit to tell him about the Grail, and this is the hermit's response. Many brave knights dwell with the Grail at Montsalvêche. I will tell you what sustains them, a stone of purest kind. It is called lapsit excelsis. And you know, this is sort of like the Sorcerer's Stone from Harry Potter. which we'll get to on another day. In the 12th century quest to San Grail, here's how the Grail appears, very much religious and associated with communion. Joseph appeared to begin the sacrament of Mass. After a brief delay, he took from the vessel a host made in the form of bread, and when he raised it up, a figure of a child descended above him. After he held the host for a long time, Josephus returned it to the holy vessel. And then in Mallory, again, we skipped this section, but it's Galahad who attains the Grail, and here is the passage. Then seemed to Galahad and his companions that there came an old man and 4 angels in heaven, and the 4 angels bore him in a chair and set him down before the silver table upon which the San Grail was. Then they looked and saw a man come out of the holy vessel, who had all the signs of the passion of Jesus Christ, bleeding all openly. This is, said he, the holy vessel. Therefore you must go there and take with you this holy vessel. Later writers continue with the Grail. For Tennyson, it's described as a holy cup. For T.H. White, the Grail quest is what Arthur feared from the start. If you achieve perfection, you die. And actually, when Galahad achieves the Grail, returns it to the Holy Land, he does in fact die by choice. For Mary Stuart, it goes back to Celtic origins and is described as a bowl they sometimes called a cauldron. And then for the Monty Python cast and crew, it results in a quest that culminates with the French proclaiming, "We've already got one. Oh yes, it's very nice." For Dan Brown, the meaning of the Grail relies on wordplay. San Grail or Holy Grail, from the French, san meaning holy, and graal meaning grail, becomes the way that Dan Brown rearranges the word etymologically, becomes Sank Grail or royal blood. And in his novel, the Grail is blood in the form of Christ's offspring. It's very, very controversial rendering of it. There are other modern renderings as well, including Bernard Malamud's baseball story, The Natural, where the Holy Grail is actually winning the World Series. And the coach is named Pops Fisher or Fisher King. The hero of that work, the baseball player's name is Roy Hobbs, which means like rustic king, and he's sort of a Percival-like character. Remember, we read the narrative of Percival being a natural, and that's where the title comes from. So The Natural is another version, as well as Dan Brown's novel. And then some more recent ones in film that I'm going to show you a couple of scenes from. And this first one is Indiana Jones, the Holy Grail scene. It's going to take about 5 minutes, so let's watch.
Strangely dressed for a night.
Not exactly. A night? What do you mean?
I was chosen because I was the bravest, the most worthy. The honor was mine until another came to challenge me to single combat. I pass it to you who vanquished me.
Listen, I don't have time to explain it.
Wisely, for as the true Grail will bring you life, the false Grail will take it from you.
I'm not a historian. I have no idea what it looks like. Which one is it?
Let me choose.
Thank you, Doctor. bears the cup of the King of Kings. Eternal life. What is happening to me?
He chose poorly.
It would not be made out of gold.
That's the cup of a carpenter. There's only one way to find out.
You have chosen wisely. But the grail cannot pass beyond the great seal. That is the boundary and the price of immortality.
Alrighty, so there we go with that. So Indiana Jones is using the Grail to cure his father, whereas Galahad uses the Grail to cure the injured Fisher King. And actually, it's Balin. Remember the narrative of Balin and Balan that starts all this mess. Balin is who injures the Fisher King, the maimed king. Let's see what else about this. Notice that the Grail here is a simple, very simple vessel, and that's the makers of this film are going back to the notion that the Grail, as medieval writers portray it, was the cup used at the Last Supper, and that maybe Christ, being the son of a carpenter, would have made it, and that therefore it probably would have been very humble and not this fancy, bejeweled, or ornate kind of cup. One other thing, back to Dan Brown, is the Da Vinci Code that I was referencing. I don't think I told you that. Okay, so last of all, I'm going to show you a trailer from my personal favorite version of a modern Grail quest, and it's from the 1991 film, The Fisher King, starring Robin Williams. So here's the trailer. I highly recommend this movie.
Okay, Jack, we're on the air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, it's Monday morning, and I'm Jack Lucas.
In the world of talk radio, Jack Lucas was king.
Look, I said I want an offer, they can forget it.
To stay on top, he did whatever he had to.
Forgive me!
But one day, Jack went too far.
It was Mr. Lucas's offhand remark that seemed to have fatal impact on Mr. Melnick.
No matter what I have, it feels like I have nothing.
Yo, what's going on?
And just when he was about to give up on his own life, he stumbled into Perry's.
Unhand that degenerate and remove your presence! I like New York in June. How about you?
You know who I am?
A hood ornament.
No. I'm a knight on a special quest,
A quest.
and I need help.
You're out of your mind!
Yes!
Now, Jack has to do something he's never done before.
Isn't she a vision? I'm deeply smitten.
Help someone else.
I thought that if I could get him this girl that he loves, things would change for me.
Let's do it right here. Let's go to that place out yonder in the grass.
And this is Perry. Perry.
Perry.
No, it is Perry.
Huh? Like Moses.
I think they were made for each other. Scary, but true.
Sometimes, to find yourself,
I'm the janitor of God. Find some pretty wonderful things in the trash.
you have to risk it all.
I'm not doing that.
Robin Williams, Jeff Bridges, The Fisher King.
I love this guy!
You hug me in public again.
So you guys see that the Grail quest is something that's still very relevant today. We're moving into a section on medievalism, how these themes that from so long ago, they keep being reinvented, reworked in ways that are new and relevant to everyone. So that is your lesson on the Holy Grail.